disadvantages. In addition to that, there's some advantages for starting seed. Now, we're not going to discourage you from going out and buying plants, but our topic today is actually planting seeds, starting your seeds at home. So there's some advantages. For one, it's very rewarding. It's fun to plant things and see what's going to come up, and it's usually an experiment. Some things will come up and some things will come up, but they won't flourish. But see, as you go along, you're going to find out what works in your yard. We're going to also, if you're planting from seeds, there's a big variety of cultivars, which means, for example, let's say echinacea. Purple coneflower is what is native to here. But if you want to get some different cultivars, you can order from seed, and you can get things that are hot pink, or you can get things that are yellow, echinacea, and light pink. So you can expand your plant variations if you order from seeds, and you can get all that at a box store and even at the nursery, because they plan for the masses. And so if you want to go outside of that, you can order, you can get different kinds of seeds. And then also, it's not very expensive. A plant, if you buy a plant, it's going to cost you, because that grower has put some love and TLC and time into that, and the plant is a little bit older. Seeds, we're going to start them, and we'll get maybe 100 or more if we're lucky, and versus just one plant. Also, it's not hard, and you can, if you have seeds, you can also plan your garden so that it's blooming from spring to fall. And if you have if you have a variety of plants, which is what our pollinators need. They don't just need one type. We want to have a good variety. Then you can plant from spring to fall on your blooms. And then, of course, I just love slinging the flowers. So I told you that's one of my favorite things. So as I talk about this, and as I was studying, it's hard to narrow down, because there's so much I want to tell you, and I'm so excited about it. But we have to narrow it down because we have a small amount of time. Also, this is just an introductory class on how to do this. So on your handout, as you'll find, and you don't need to look at it now, but a lot of the information that we're giving is on your handout, because Ray and I are trying to give you tools so that you can go back home and do your own research. But we're kind of getting your mind started going on how to start this. So what we're going to cover today, I've got down of what we're covering, is identifying our plants for pollinators, planning our garden site. We're going to give you some tips on how to plant it and what you need to be thinking about as you plant it. And then I'm going to show you how to pick out seeds and what you need to know about your seeds. And that will help you determine if this is a particular good thing for you to plant, or you need to re-evaluate, like, oh, I've got something else I probably need to do. And then also we're going to tell you how to prepare the site, where you're going to plant, because there's some special things. We're going outside of the natural process, so we want to make sure that we have the most advantage of getting things started. Also, we're going to be talking about how you care for your seedlings, and then also caring for your pollinator garden year-round, because remember, we're going to try to help those insects from beginning to the end of their life cycle, and as they start a new one. So, all that to be said, pollinators like particular things. So Ray, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, pretty much bees, butterflies, all kinds of bees, leafcutter bees, sweat bees. There's a multitude of different kinds of bees, honeybees. Butterflies also, they're equal opportunity eaters. They'll take nectar from whatever's handy. They're like flower garden's like a buffet to them. They'll eat about anything that appeals to their taste. The scent's good. Whatever they're attracted to, color attracts them. So it's easy to feed the pollinators. And sorry if I got to follow the notes a bit here, but what are advantages? We talked about native pollinator plants. What's the advantage? Why would you want a native plant over a conventional cultivated plant? Well, first of all, native plants, as the name signifies, they're native to our area. So they're adapted to the soil types, they're adapted to the moisture, sunlight, the environmental conditions here, and they'll tend to do the best in this environment. They're also, native plants tend to require less fertilizer, sometimes less moisture, so you can save a little on watering, you can save a little on fertility. It's a good thing. And then there's a really great handout called Planting for Pollinators in East Tennessee. It's W1095 from you'll have a reference on your handout, but this is great for showing you native pollinators, the native plants that those pollinators like if you want to attract specific insects to your garden. And it's just an all-around good resource. And their research has shown, this is the UT Extension research locally, that native wildflowers can have up to 4 times more attractive power to native pollinators than your regular ornamental flowers in your garden. Not to say ornamental flowers won't feed the plants, but there's another issue is if you want to see the full life cycle of some of these insects, then you want to have plants that they will lay their eggs on. And if you look at something like a monarch butterfly, it'll sup anywhere. It loves anywhere there's nectar, no problem. I've had it on my butterfly bushes, on anything that flowers pretty much, they hop around, but they won't lay their eggs. You won't see their young, the nice, cool, big caterpillars that everybody likes to see. So you have to have a specific plant. And milkweed or swampweed are 2 native plants that monarchs like for laying their eggs on, and that they actually have, the plants have the nutrients and chemicals that they require to grow. So if you want to see the young, got to have the specific plants that will nurture them, or the butterfly will just fly on. He'll take your nectar, but he'll fly on to the neighbor somewhere down the road or out in the field where he can find some milkweed or some swampweed. So, there's lots of great resources. That's what your handouts will have on there. I love this W1095 extension publication. It's great. You can find it online. It's free. I printed it up. It's great. There's information on Tennessee smart yards. There's also Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Conservatory. That's out of Texas. But they cover wildflowers for a great part of the country, a great resource for finding out what kind of wildflower. You want a wildflower? What do you have to choose from? Great place to go. And they'll also help guide you to what plants are adapted to this area. Now you want to plan your garden site. Do you want to see it every day as it's growing? Do you want it a secret garden behind a wall where nobody can see it but you? Choose a garden site where you think you might want to put it. I like to see it during the year as it's growing. I want to watch the flowers. I want to see the pollinators come, the big old monarchs and whatever else is coming by. Hummingbirds will visit these plants. So you get a nice show all through the season if you put it where you can observe it. But if you only have a space that's available on the shady spot, north side of the house, or full sun, then you're going to have to plan accordingly for what plants go in those spots and will do the best. So once you've selected your site, where you want to put it, now you have to decide or determine the conditions of the site. It's important when you select plants that you know the lighting condition. Is it full sun all day? Is it sort of half sun, like on the east side of my house? I get sun all morning, which is great. The afternoon heat from the summers, the sun in the evening, it's blocked off, it's shaded. Plants do fantastic. Most plants, even full sun plants, will love that kind of environment. But there are those that thrive in full sun all day. You don't want to put a shade-loving plant in a full light plant or a sit area because it might just fry. Think of a fern. That's not a pollinator plant, but think of a fern. You put that in full sun here in the summer, it's going to be toast. It's got to have shade. So you want to know the lighting conditions. You want to know the moisture conditions. Are you going to just let nature water it? Do you have a sprinkler system that's going to be able to supplement in those hot, dry days of summer, the dog days of summer, the sweaty days of summer? Do you have sprinklers? Do you have access to water bib where you can just come out and water that area? Those are important things to know because if you are depending on nature to water, you want plants that can thrive in drier conditions. And native plants are naturally able to survive in drier conditions. That's why they're here and native, because they've had to survive tough times. So that's a good thing to know, what your water source is, and also are you in a wet, boggy area? If it's the bottom part of your yard and it's wet, you don't want to put something that can't stand the water, because it'll just rot out and your beautiful plant just caves in and dies. I like the way you say die in the South. I've always said die, but I hear die. It just seems so much more meaningful. And what kind of soil do you have? Well, duh, we're in Tennessee. What do you have? It's that red stuff. Great for building pyramids, bricks, you know, that sort of thing. And if you live in a housing district, what's the first thing they do when they come in for a house? They take your topsoil off and probably sell it somewhere else. And you get all the good, luscious, hard red clay. So really now when you're planting a garden, you're not working generally with topsoil. You're working with the subsoil, which means you may have to consider some amendments and working the soil up. We'll talk about that in a bit. So it's good to know your soil. And good little add here is you may want to take a soil test. We're always preaching, take a soil test. And it's important, it can be, I haven't done it, but our soils tend to be, especially the red soils, tend to be acid. And so acid-loving plants do well there. Plants that don't like acid soils will have a struggle. And same thing, you put the acid-loving plants in another area that isn't acid, they will struggle. But that's usually not a problem. Most things are acid here, but there are areas that are not. Soil tests will tell you that. Tell you the pH of your soil. Acid is in the range of 6, neutral 7, and it goes from 1 to 13. So it's a big range, but nothing's going to grow in a 1 probably. Very acid. Another important thing to know is the USDA hardiness zone. It's important to know because that's going to be on all your seed packets, all the information, descriptions for different wildflowers and ornamental flowers. You want to know that your plants that you're paying your money for will survive in zone 7A. So this valley, Knoxville area, where I live near Lenore City, it's zone 7A. And what that refers to is the average coldest temperature for your area. And that usually means you can grow plants that will survive from 0 to 5 degrees. Hasn't been an issue for a few years, but what happened last year? We were down to the end of that, bottom of that range, and you might have had some great plants that survived for 3 or 4 years. That year was the separator. It nailed quite a few things. Where I live, a lot of dead plants. So, know your growing conditions. Those will help you determine best plants for your garden. Can we back up real quick? The other thing I forgot, you see there's kind of a scattered design and there's a more formal design. Good thing to know. I like the English look. That's sort of a random look. And this is a more planned formal garden. These are not necessarily wildflowers, but bees are going to love them, butterflies will love them. So depending on what kind of structure you want, that'll help determine the kind of plants you're going to purchase and how many of what kind. Either you're going to group them or you're going to have just a random mess that looks beautiful. I say mess in a good way. So, selecting the best plants. Well, first of all, you want to have plants that are adapted to the southeast. Something from northeast Washington or Maine or Vermont may not make it here. It might make it in the summer, but it definitely may not make it through the summer. It's too hot here. And vice versa, something from Southern California, which we had a lot of poinsettias. They grow wild in the yard. Here, even a regular winter will kill them. But you can grow them as an annual and replant them each year. So just because they're not listed for zone 7A, know that many things you can grow for the summer, but you're going to be replanting every year. I want to get some poppies. I love California poppies, but they won't overwinter here usually, unless you have a really mild winter. But you can plant them every year. Beautiful. So you have options. So think of the right plant in the right place. Like we said, you want to know your environment. Don't put something that won't do well in that environment, whether it's light, moisture, or whatever. If you have a dry zone, you might want something like this geranium. Don't know the exact species name, but they do better in a drier environment. They still need moisture. They'll survive with the rainfall, but they'll do better without being watered. They'll survive it better. This is bee balm fantastic plant. If you ever take the leaves and rub them, it's kind of a minty, really refreshing smell. The flowers are great, all kinds of bugs, bees, flies, all kinds of flies are pollinators too, by the way. And there's some beautiful flies, blue bottle flies, there's metallic colored flies. So you can see a lot of color of insects, and bee balm attracts, but that needs more moisture. So that's an example of a plant for a drier area and a plant for a more moist area, or where you can supplement with sprinklers, that sort of thing. You have annuals and perennials and biennials. And just real quickly, annuals, flower grows, plant develops, flower dies, produces seed, dies. You got to restart every year. Perennials do the same thing, except they survive over winter. They can spread underground, above ground, and they'll tend to grow out and make you a bigger clump. But they come back every year. They're perennials. And then once in a while, you get a biennial, and that just means the first year it pops out of the ground, grows low on the ground, you think you did something wrong, you want to kill it, but it's just saying, hold on a minute, and come next year, it'll take off, and usually they shoot up. You ever seen,
Hollyhock.
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 Sorry, mind blank there. Hollyhock. I don't see it around here much. We had a lot, in Northern California because it could survive the winter really easy. But that's what it is. It looks uninviting the first year, but then next year it's just a beautiful display. So don't be discouraged. Even some of the perennials may not flower well the first year, but they'll come on like gangbusters the second year, the third year, the fourth year. And so some easy annuals that I like is zinnias, cosmos, marigolds, sunflowers. There's many, there's hundreds of them, of annuals you can choose from. And according to this nice publication again, hairy sunflowers are very high on the list for attracting all kinds of bees and butterflies. But if you go out and look at sunflowers, I mean, there's ones that are 10 feet tall with heads like this, and there's ones with multiple heads. So there's plenty to choose from according to your garden conditions and if you have room for tall plants. They're fun too. And the birds love them. You let them go to seed, the birds will be pecking those, and then pretty soon they'll eat one seed, knock 5 to the ground, and the doves come along and other birds. So now you not only do you see pollinators early on, you see the birds coming in. And then we have some perennials, black-eyed Susans, and they come in all types and shapes, colors. And blanket flowers I really like, yarrow, purple coneflower, which Sheila mentioned, echinacea, mountain mint, cardinal flower, and columbine. One thing to consider with choosing perennials especially is, are they invasive? Now, our good friend here put down morning glory.
Oh.
Now, that's a beautiful, I didn't mean to dish you or anything. Morning glory is a beautiful plant, and there's varieties that are, I've seen pink, nothing like the morning sun coming through that bloom, or the evening sun coming through that bloom. They're beautiful, but you know what the problem is. Mine went over the fence in California and went 20 feet down the fence line in the neighbor's yard. And I filled like 3 trash cans with that stuff. So they are invasive. So usually on the seed packet or in the seed information in a catalog, they'll tell you very invasive, moderately invasive, buyer beware. And actually we showed some, this bee balm, same thing. It spread, I had 5 different kinds of bee balm in my yard. I loved it, and all of a sudden I realized, where's my other plants going? Well, that stuff is very invasive. You can plant for it, have it in a spot where it can grow, but with that, you can just take a shovel and whack it, hurt it, and you leave the center part intact, and it'll take off like a champ, and you can get it back to where you want it. Just be aware. And some things, especially like black-eyed Susan, it makes so many flowers or seeds that you're going to have hundreds of starts coming up. Well, I guess a hoe is good for that, or Roundup. But we try to avoid the herbicides and pesticides as much as possible. And if you're an organic gardener, It's hoe time, yes.
I just wonder when you can separate those black-eyed Susans.
Pretty much the way I've seen, anytime you want. They can be flowering, it can be in spring, they can be dormant, but probably the best time would be the spring or the fall, because now if the fall might be best, because then you can take a chunk out, move it where you want it. The roots are going to establish all winter, so when spring comes, they're going to pop up, send up seeds. Instead of kind of cutting their growth short, stopping it, and then it has to restart again, they'll grow, but you'll probably have later flowering. So, yeah, you can do it pretty much any time, but I think the fall is the best time for nice spring flowers, or spring, either one. Okay, and if all of this gives you a big headache, what do I do? Where am I going? What do I want? Oh my God, this is crazy. There's a solution. My wife and I tried 3 years ago. We decided we're going to get a packet of mixed wildflower seeds. At most gardening stores, even at some of the big package places, they have seeds like these. Sheila's going to show you some down the line, but it's called Precious Pollinators, a forage mix. And we bought a couple different kinds of mixes like this, and all your planting instructions, that Sheila will mention, are all on the back. pH, hardiness zone, sunny, shade, all the stuff you need to know to plant is on here, and you've determined that for your garden already, right? But if you get a little hung up on what to pick, this is great. You prepare your ground like we're going to show you, plant these seeds, and you'll have perennials and annuals, you'll have flat tops, you'll have pokey flowers, you'll have multiple colors. It's wonderful.
So
and
they're
easy.
mixing annuals and perennials in the same package?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can buy annuals with this seed company and other seed companies like Burpee or Ball or whatever. Now,
So I'm going to tell you how you pick your seeds. There are a couple of things that you need to know about seeds is when you are going to buy seeds, you want to buy seeds for this current year. The reason why is if it's current, it has more viability for it to germinate. We want the best amount of flowers that we can get. We won't want to plant 100 and only 2 come up. So the older the seed is, the viability will go down. And then also, you want to buy it from a reliable source because those people are going to be taking care of the seeds from the time that they are harvested to the time you plant them. So a seed, just the basics of seeds, a seed in order for it to germinate, it needs to have warmth and moisture and then light after that. So if you want to keep a seed from germinating, you're going to remove those things. You're going to keep it cool, dry, and then in a dark place. So that's how you're storing it. So if you buy seeds, you want to make sure it's a reputable dealer, or if you do like a seed swap or something, and Ray's got some beautiful seeds up here. So Ray's going to take care of these seeds, and then they're going to come up next year, or if he plants them this year because he's taking care of them. So you can do a seed swap and things like that, but you want to make sure that whoever's taking care of those seeds, they know what they're doing. Otherwise, you're going to plant it and you're not going to have as good of success. So that's one of the reasons why we say make sure you buy it for the current year, because your success rate, remember this is a beginning class and you want to make sure you're as successful as possible. So also, as Ray said, you're going to try to pick seeds no matter what that are more designed for the southeast, because we are special. We have very high humidity, and we go from warm to hot to hot to hot, and it continues to be humid. Well, some plants you can buy seeds that are not for here, like the California poppies or some other seeds, and they might do well in your yard, but they won't flourish. So we really want you to be successful. So really pick something that is for this zone, and also that is for, and that takes into account some of our humidity, but zones are more for the cold, but we're looking at the humid and heat for the summer. So we want to get something that's specifically designed for the southeast. And then also, when you're choosing seeds, you also have an option on some things to get things that are not, they're mildew resistant, and like zinnias, they usually are, columbine, they have a tendency to get a little powdery mildew on them. Well, there are cultivars that have been designed that are not as susceptible to that. And then also they have things that say that they're rabbit or deer resistant, and so those are good too, but you know that if it's rabbit or deer resistant, that only means that that's going to be the third thing that they go for. Then they'll go to something else, and then they'll go to that. So it's not that it's a true far way of keeping them away. So now, again, this is kind of a basic class. I want to tell you that when you get a seed packet, you're going to look at both the front and the back for information on the seeds. So I don't know how closely you've ever looked at them, but this is Botanical Interest. This is my favorite seed packet company because they have so much information. And they even have information on the inside of the packet, but you have to plant everything before you get to the inside. But you know, like for nasturtium, it tells you that Thomas Jefferson grew them on his property, and that you can use nasturtium in your salads and stuff like that. Now, I'm not promoting that, but that's what Botanical Interest will say. It gives you the history on it, so it's rather interesting information. But if you get a seed, like a seed packet, or you get seeds like this from Ray, and you don't know all about them, you can look them up on the internet. You can look up on the website for Botanical Interest, and it will give you all the information you need. And those particular seed companies are also listed on your handout, so you can look at those. So you're going to look at the front, and then you're also going to look at the back. This is the same seed packet, so it gives you some really good information on the back. And so we're going to take a little bit closer look at the seed packet. So the seed packet is actually going to be your good instruction book on how to do your seeds and what they like. So I have Cosmos and a Mexican sunflower here as your example. So I'll use my handy dandy pointer. So this is your Cosmos and this is your Mexican sunflower. So my question is, when am I going to plant this seed outdoor? Well, the seed packet will tell you when to sow your seeds, and this one on the Cosmos, it says it's recommended to plant it outdoors, because that's why it says recommended. And then the Mexican sunflower, it's recommended to start indoors, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But remember, for this particular class, we're going outdoors, but I'm just giving you a couple of things. But it says 1 to 2 weeks after your last average frost, or when the soil temperature is at 60 degrees. So both of those things are important. The last average frost for Knoxville is April the 15th. That's a general rule of thumb. But we know that it's still a little sketchy then, so you can be a little safer April the 23rd, or you can be a little bit safer on May the 1st. But as you go out in date, it means your plant has to germinate, it has to grow and mature before it flowers. So you're just pushing it further into the summer when it's going to bloom. So, and then also, so that's fine, but you have to calculate that. Also, it says that the temperature of the soil needs to be 60 degrees. So you want to make sure, remember what we need to get germinate, you need to have moisture and heat. So this particular plant needs to be at least 60 degrees, your soil. So you can use a little thermometer and find out, but those two things are very important. No more frost, and then also you need to have a warm place for it to be planted. Now the Mexican sunflower, the reason why it needs to be, it says you can't plant it outside 1 to 2 weeks after your last average frost, but it's recommended to plant 6 to 8 weeks. The reason why is a Mexican sunflower gets really tall like a beautiful regular sunflower, but Mexican is bright orange. But it will not bloom until the end of August or the 1st of September. But if you start it sooner, you can make it flower much sooner by transplanting it outside. But remember, we're talking about inside plants. The other thing here is it'll tell you the days it emerges. It'll tell you how deep that you need to plant it. This one says barely cover, and then this one says that you need to just press into the surface also. But it gives you a lot of information on your plant, and then also it tells you if you need to thin them. There's just a lot of really good information. Now, another thing that we've already covered is, remember, we want to get seeds for the current year. So if you look very closely at the Mexican sunflower, you can see what year this picture was taken. So I would probably not buy this one because it says it's packed for 2020. So it possibly could grow. I could germinate some of those seeds, but the likelihood of me getting all, like say there's 50 in that thing, I might get maybe 20, and as the years go up by. So if you're going to take the trouble, you want to make sure you're as successful as possible. So, but it always have a package date on the seeds. On a good package. So I really like Botanical Interest. Now there's also a few things that you might want to know about on seeds, and the seed packet will tell you is there's two special things about seeds. Now think about when they fall in nature, they fall in the fall and they go through the winter and then they germinate in the spring. So one of the things that the seed has to go through is stratification or scarification. So stratification is where it goes through the winter and it gets cold and it breaks the dormancy. That helps the plant, it has like a little chemical reaction, and then it comes out in the spring, it's able to germinate. And so that keeps it from like rotting and things like that. This particular chemical, it helps it to go through the winter and germinate in the spring. The other thing is scarification is where when it's planted, there's something that has to be done to the seed coat. It has to be broken in order for the seed, because the seed coat's so hard. So like a sweet pea or a nasturtium, those are a little bit tougher. So if a little animal got a hold of it, gnawed on it, that would break the seed coat, or other things, would break the seed coating so that it could start germinating. But on the package, it will tell you special instructions on this one needs to be stratified, but so it's cold, and it gives you the special instructions on how to do it, so that if you're doing it yourself, you can bypass that winter process and you can do it at home and get your seeds going a little bit faster on that. So after we have picked out our seeds, then now it's time to prepare our site so that we can plant them. So Ray, would you tell us more about that?
This is the fun part.
You gotta dig the hole.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately with this, we don't have to dig holes. We're pretty much working at the surface. But again, remember back, what kind of soils do we have here?
Clay.
Predominantly red clay, nasty old red clay. Good to support the foundation of a house. It's a little tough to grow plants in. So, oftentimes what you can do, well, let's start at the beginning. First off, remove all the debris off the top of your planting site. You might have sticks, stems, loose old plant material. Just rake that off. And then I like to water about 2-3 days ahead of time. And you want to soften the ground up. That makes removal of the weeds. If you're going to pull the weeds, you're going to hoe them out. Instead of hitting at that ground with the hoe and having it bounce up and hit you in the head, it'll actually go in the ground and pull out some weeds. So it's a useful thing to have that soil moist. If you see big rocks, you may want to pull them out. Make that a smooth surface. Now, because it's a subsoil, it's not your native topsoil, you may want to add some amendments. So a mulch or a compost, you want to kind of recreate the topsoil that isn't there, that was removed. So a little compost, topsoil. You can buy topsoil at the store, but either way, put a layer of that, 2-3 inches on top. And if you're going to rototill, which I like to do a shallow rototill, because you don't want to bring up a lot of weeds from down below, and just rototill that in until you get a nice material that looks a little more like this. That you never see that in most Tennessee soils, right? But that's what you want. And so that's a good place to start. If you're planting a garden and it's going to be perennial, remember you have one time to do this. So if you can do it at the beginning, it'll last you for several years. So you added in your compost or mulch, you've tilled it in, leveled it out, a rake. Well, she's going to explain, Sheila will explain how to actually plant them. But that's how you get the soil ready for planting. And I don't know why you want to review your soil test at this time, but it's always good to keep in mind your pH, and if you have a really nasty acid soil, you might be able to add some amendments to neutralize the soil and make it more healthy for your plants. And remember always that if you choose native plants, that's a cool thing, they're adapted to where you want to grow. So they have the best chance of surviving and taking off and providing a nice, healthy plant. One quick thing, more of your flowers that you buy at the store, ornamentals, they're beautiful, but you gotta baby them. You gotta baby them a little. Natives are a little tougher.
That is true. So now, after we've prepared the soil and we're ready to plant the plants, then it's we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. So now I've got the soil. When do I plant the seeds? Well, once again, we go back to read the seed packet. It'll tell you 1 to 2 weeks before the average frost, or 1 to 2 weeks after the average frost. But you always go back to the seed packet. How deep do you plant your seeds? Where do I look? Back at the seed packet. So it's always referring you back to the seed packet. And then how far apart should I plant? Well, if you're doing a wildflower arrangement like Ray, with that messy, kind of beautiful look, you're not going to worry about distance between plants. But if you're doing something that's more formal, like you have a little garden and you've got only so much to work with, you're going to pay attention to the plants and how far apart you plant them. So you would look at the directions and say, okay, they need to be 12 inches apart, or they need to be how long. But this will, the seed packet will tell you where you need to plant them and how far apart. And then also, if you have a smaller garden, you're going to want to make sure that you're looking back at the seed packet. It'll tell you how tall the plants are. So if you have a small garden, you're going to want to put like the tall plants in the back and the shorter plants in the front so that you can see everything. So you'll plan a little bit better on that. And then also, should you thin them? So once you plant things, the wildflower, the big mix, you're not going to thin it. But if it's a small garden, you're going to thin some because you want those plants to be short and stocky, because the stockier and healthier they are, they'll have bigger blooms and it'll just be more gorgeous and they'll be more stable. And if you do have to thin them, and your seed packet will tell you, you thin them with either your fingers, you pinch them off, or you take a little pair of scissors and you cut them. Because the roots are so tiny, if you pull them, you're going to disturb the plant that you might want to keep. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of that. And after that, once your seeds come up, Ray's going to tell you how to take care of them.
All right, well, everybody mulches, right? You see that every spring, they're putting out a ton of mulch, usually 3-4 inches, nice and thick, keep the weeds down. But what happens if you plant a wildflower garden and you put 3-4 inches of mulch on top of the ground? If it suppresses weeds, it's going to keep your flowers from growing. So you don't want to mulch right off the bat. Or you could put just a very thin layer, because we know that mulch helps keep this, when you water, it helps prevent the soil from getting as hard, and it keeps water available, keeps the moisture level more constant. So if you do want to mulch, wait till the plants get up 5-6 inches. Then you can come back in and start filling in around your plants with mulch to keep out the weeds. Your plants you want are already established. And when to water? Well, if your soil's dry, you got to water right away or the seeds aren't going to germinate. And how do you water? Well, you water very carefully. And what's really cool is Sheila bought this recently. 600 holes in the end of that little baby. And so when you put that hose up to this and you go to water, you can have a nice, even, soft, almost like a spring rain, a spring shower. And just gently water. You don't want to wash away the soil. You don't want to push hard and harden the soil so you get a crust, because then sometimes the seedlings don't have a difficult time coming through that. So water gently, and then as your plants are developing, just keep an eye on the soil. Stick a finger down in there where there's not a plant. Is it moist? And if it's starting to dry up a bit, just give it another light shot of water. Fertilization. Remember, if you're doing wildflowers, they're native, they don't need fertilization much. They can exist on very low levels of fertility. So no matter if they're wildflower seeds or conventional flowers, ornamentals, generally do not fertilize when you plant. Just whatever's in the soil is good. There's nutrient in the seed that gets that plant going. Let that plant establish itself, get up. I'm not exactly sure how far, but maybe 5-6 inches, it's going healthy, and then you may want to fertilize just a bit, and you want to use a fertilizer that's a low yield fertilizer. Something like, well, there's an organic fertilizer that's 555. And if you don't know what that is, each number refers to a certain element, and it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So 5 means in 100 pounds of bag of fertilizer, there's 5 pounds of nitrogen. And there'll be instructions on the bag that says, plant so much fertilizer per square foot, that sort of thing, so don't be like I was when I started out. A little bit of fertilizer is good, a lot more is better. What'll happen is you might end up killing your plants, burning the outside edges of the leaves, or, like I did with my tomatoes, those babies took off, got this tall. Where's my tomatoes? Nothing. They're gorgeous plants, no flowers. Well, I over-fertilized at the beginning. So Same thing with wildflowers or any flowers. If you want to see the flowers, you want them to progress naturally, and if you over-fertilize, they want to make plants. Later on, when the fertility leaches out of the soil, they'll start to flower. But now you've missed a window of time in your garden where you could have been seeing flowers. So be careful about the fertilizer. If you use something like Miracle Grow, which is fantastic stuff, it has 5 times more nitrogen than that 444. It's like 20-20-20. But what do? You dilute it. So you would put like 5 parts water and 1 part Miracle Grow. Now you've got your 5-5-5 or some solution. And then you water with that. So you're spoon feeding fertility. You don't want to overdo it. Just keep them happy, keep them going. If I eat too much, I don't do the best. And if I spoon feed myself, which I don't, I spoon feed myself, but I keep going. It's just good to don't overdo the fertilizer. Save some money and have nicer flowers. Potential problems you might see. Well, you might say, man, I better kill that baby. Well, what is it? Yeah, it's a monarch butterfly caterpillar. So if you start seeing your leaves being chewed, or sometimes you'll see holes in leaves, or you'll see a light color comes up because there's something eaten on the bottom side of the leaf. Before you do anything, track it down, be a little Sherlock Hemlock, get out in the garden and turn that leaf over and look and see what's causing the problem. Then you can decide what you want to do. Do you want to apply killer and nuclear insecticides? No, because what happens if you kill the baddies like that, what's going to happen to the good guys? It's going to nail those, or bees will come along and sniff that, and they won't land. Or they'll get mad that you did that to their flowers, and they'll come after you. Happen to be in an alfalfa field. So know what your target is. Don't necessarily have to use pesticides. A big baddie is what? The Japanese beetle around here. But you can go out, take a little jar of water, put some soap in it, put that underneath the flower that has the Japanese beetle, tickle it, it falls off into the jar, you kill it. And if I get a perverse pleasure out of that, I collect them in a jar. But that's called biological control. And you're not affecting the beneficials or the pollinators. Another thing is caring for your plants year-round. We talked about how to establish them. If you want to have an extended period of flowering, one thing you can do is we call deadhead. Once the flowers are spent or they're done, at least in the beginning of the year, clip those flowers back, clip them off. And it'll encourage new flower growth. If not, if you leave them, they'll try to produce seed and maybe not reflower. So at the beginning of the year, maybe the first 2/3 of the year, yeah, keep those old blooms picked off or cut off. It'll encourage new flowering. And then in the fall, let those flowers go to maturity. Now you're going to have seeds for, well, like for me, I get a lot of seeds on echinacea, coneflower, and black-eyed Susan. They get those nice black seeds. There's a really cool bird that likes those, goldfinches. And man, I've just seen some beautiful goldfinches come in, the pairs, the male and the female, other birds. So you're not only feeding pollinators, you're feeding other wildlife, and it's fun to see and have. So you let that last set go. Plus, if you have annuals, let those go to seed, that last bunch of flowers. They reseed your garden, you'll have those annuals come back again. And what's cool is if you have pink and white and some other color, if the bees move that pollen around, you might just come up with some new colored flowered plants that are really neat. You never know, that's what's fun. And then my neighbor likes to just clean cut. When it gets done flowering, she just nukes it down to the ground. Personally, I think these look a little messy.
Yeah.
But sometimes these things might have hollow stems. I don't know what that is offhand. But they'll provide habitat for bees, where the bees will lay their eggs in the hollow stems for overwintering, and the larvae develop. So next year you have your new supply of bees. Other things like these, you can get some interesting geometrical shapes. And what's cool is your first frost, your first snow gets on those things, and they really make them beautiful to look at. So you can have beauty from the beginning, during the season, and all the way to the end. And then if you decide you can't stand it anymore, cut them down, but leave that refuge on the ground. And so leaf cutting bees, other bees that like to lay in the stems can still go there and lay their eggs, and you've provided a habitat. Encourage them to stay in your garden and come back for the next year.
And just for your information, this is Joe Pye, Echinacea, and Mountain Mint. And that Mountain Mint is my new favorite one. So we have covered a lot today. So we've identified some pollinator plants for you to start. You have a list of places you can go look for them. We've also given you some tips on how to analyze your garden site. Remember, the two things you need to check for is sunlight and moisture. And then also we've talked about choosing the right plant for the right place. So based on what you found out, then you're going to pick your plants. Now we've talked about seeds and how you need to pick your seeds, and read the directions on the seed because it gives you everything you need to know on how to plant them, when to plant them, how deep to plant them. And then also Ray's giving you some information on how to prepare your site and how you need to remove everything, and you need to scalp all the weeds. If you can't pull them and you've got a bigger spot, you would take a hoe and you would clean all that stuff out and remove that. And then also how to start your seeds. Remember, going back, how deep, when, and how to water, how to thin. That's all on your seed packet. And then how to care for your seedlings. Remember, we're going to try to get these seedlings, we're getting them off to a good start, but our goal is for them to take care of themselves. So you're going to water and fertilize at the very beginning when it's the appropriate time, but you're going to taper off because you want them to take care of themselves. We want them to be independent and not codependent on us. And then also it's very nice to extend the season, because it's not just extending the season for us, it's extending the season so that the pollinators have a place to hibernate and have a habitat, and then also it gives the birds something to eat in the fall. So we've covered a lot in a short amount of time. I'm sure you have more questions, but we have a place for you to go ask questions. So we're going to stay and answer some of your questions, but also this information, the Knox County Master Gardeners, we have an Ask a Master Gardener program with a telephone number. We have our Knox County Extension office that will be glad to answer questions. Also, we have a website and we have a Facebook page. All this is on the back of your handout, so you don't have to write it down, but really they're great people to call and ask if you have more questions, because I know once you start researching, you probably have some more questions. So I am so glad that y'all are here today, and if you have questions, Ray and I will be glad to answer them.